welcome back to a new video. Today it's going to be a then, now, later update where I share with you all the books that I've read, the films that I've seen since my last update, and then what I'm currently reading, and then what I plan to read in the future. So there's a lot to cover today, so I'll just get started. So for books, the first one I want to talk about is The Dreams in the Witch House by H.P. Lovecraft. This is the second Penguin Classics volume of Lovecraft's works that I wanted to get to, and I did enjoy this one very much. It's very interesting, Dreams in the Witch House. This one contains a lot of his more fantasy style works, and what I particularly like about this edition is just how carefully they chose the stories to include in here. Like I mentioned, this contains a lot of Lovecraft's not so well known dark fantasy stories, and what's great about it is that there's a good sense of a shared universe in this collection in particular. Lovecraft sort of had what was known as sort of the dream world stories, or the dream world saga in a sense, where you have several stories that intersect with one another. You have characters or you have settings that feature or, are introduced or seen in several other stories. I enjoyed this compilation. I definitely would not recommend it for first-time readers of Lovecraft, just for the sake that it does get out there. It really does. Save this one for maybe your third or your second. I definitely think the Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories, that Penguin compilation, is the best way to get into Lovecraft, but overall I really enjoyed this one. And then moving on to more Lovecraft, we got a manga adaptation. This is a manga adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, one of his most well-known novellas. And this is adapted by Go Tanabe, I believe it's Go Tanabe. He did, he not only adapted it, but he did the artwork for it. And this is an amazing adaptation. He goes for a very realistic style, and I feel like that's how it ought to be with regards to Lovecraft. So this is some of his work. It's just so beautiful. I don't want to show everything, but yeah, it's gorgeous. So for a brief summary of At the Mountains of Madness, this is basically following an expedition into the Antarctic, and one part of the crew ends up losing contact with another part. They go in search for them and discover that it's a massacre at the campsite, and that all the bodies are strewn, and that there's a strange structure, a 5-pointed structure that is left behind, and which spells doom for the crew in total. I definitely would recommend that you read At the Mountains of Madness, or even just pick up the manga adaptation. I think it'd be very interesting to see how people find the manga adaptation without reading the original novella, but this is fantastic. A great adaptation by Go Tanabe. He's a huge fan of Lovecraft, and he really did justice to the original novella. So yeah. For the next one, or the next book that I read, it's another manga, and that is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I finally read some Junji Ito. So if you're unfamiliar with Uzumaki, this takes place in a town called Kurozucho, which is a town off the coast of Japan. It's bordered between the ocean and then the mountains. And this town has become possessed, but not by a creature or an entity. It's haunted by a pattern, which is the spiral. And we notice how in the beginning of the book, it starts off with people slowly becoming obsessed with the pattern of a spiral, but we see that spiral pattern manifesting in more and more grotesque ways until things just hit the fan towards, the latter part of the book. And I really, really enjoyed this. It is grotesque. It is disturbing, but there's something that draws you into it. It's the same way I felt when I look at the illustrations of Stephen Gamble in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I must say that if you grew up on those illustrations like I did, and you were disturbed but drawn to it, I definitely say that Junji Ito's art is sort of like an extension of that feeling. Look at this. Look at that. It's body horror. But the thing is, it's not like here, when we think of body horror, we often imagine the evisceration of the human body. you know, like guts or heads exploding. Here it's more of the violation or the distortion of the human body. And for me, that just gets under the skin. And Junji Ito is able to depict it incredibly well. Uh, I highly recommend Uzumaki for your first Junji Ito, and I'm looking forward to reading more from him in the future for sure. So we're moving on to the films or shows that I've seen over the past weeks, month, and it's a lot. So I won't discuss all of them because it'll just eat up the time. So I'll only discuss the ones that particularly struck me. So the first one I want to talk about is a show, and it's called Paranoia Agent. This is the only anime show that was ever directed by Satoshi Kon. And basically we're following a young woman named Tsukiko, who is a illustrator. She has just finished illustrating a very successful, or she just designed a very successful character called Marumi, who is like this cartoon dog. And she's under pressure by her company to recreate that same success. One night when she's going home, she is attacked by a young boy in rollerblades wielding a bat. And after this first assault, we notice that throughout the town, there are just several instances of the same boy attacking people. And they were basically following the various individuals who are being attacked, but also the investigators who are trying to look into this case and find out who or what is behind everything. You have all of his like Khan's fingerprints in it. You know, you have the fluid animation, you have the surrealism woven into it, and just a thought-provoking story as a whole. So yeah, check out Paranoia Agent. The next one that I want to talk about is Onibaba, another Japanese film, and this was part of the Japanese new wave of cinema that came out in the 60s. This film takes place in 14th century Japan, and there's a civil war that is currently going on, and it has taken away all the men. And we're following two women, a middle-aged woman and then her daughter-in-law. And the son has been taken away to fight in the war. And you can tell this war has it has affected everyone negatively, but it has driven the lower members of society to basically do sort of heinous things in order to survive. So the way that these two women get sustenance is that they kill any samurai who has wandered into their territory, strip off their armor, dump their bodies into a hole, and then sell off the armor for food. Things change when their neighbor returns. This is the same neighbor who left with their son and informs them that the son has died. And now things are very precarious at this point because the neighbor and the daughter-in-law, you know, have some sexual tension going on. They develop a sexual relationship, and then the mother-in-law is worried because she's afraid that the neighbor is going to take away the daughter-in-law. It is such a beautifully shot film. It is black and white. And the thing is, this entire film, you're surrounded by these reeds because they live in a marsh. And you get this sense of purgatory, like pure isolation. Like you feel so alone, like there's nothing else, just the reeds in this hut and these characters. And it's a very quiet film. The film actually starts off very quiet, in fact. And a supernatural horror element doesn't appear until like the latter part. But yeah, there's a lot going for this film. You know, you can say, you know, the social class commentary about what, you know, the elites and their war has done to these people in the lower class, what they're being driven to do. And then you have the element of, you know, the horror and the supernatural. This film also has things to say about sexuality as well. I highly recommend that you give Onibaba a go. So after watching just Japanese cinema, I did like a complete left turn and I watched Disney films. So the first one that I watched after Onibaba was Tarzan, and I won't go into depth about Tarzan because my last video was all about Tarzan, a huge movie review about it. Please go check that video out. I'll link it down below. But yeah, Tarzan, needless to say, I love this film. It's a new favorite Disney film. After Tarzan, though, I watched Treasure Planet, a highly underrated Disney film. And this film I really enjoyed. I do think it's a above average Disney film for sure. Its strongest points for me were just the sheer creativity. the premise in itself, you're taking a swashbuckling adventure like Treasure Island, and then you're transplanting it into a sci-fi or intergalactic setting. I think that's just really just creative. And you can really tell that the creators had to stretch their creative muscles with this one. And it shows in the character designs, in the technology, in the settings. I really admire that. But what I really love about this film is the emotional relationship in here. Oftentimes in Disney films, it's a romance, but in this one, it's like a surrogate father-son relationship, and it's between the protagonist and the antagonist. And I think, that's nice to see, because we're so used to romance, and they pull off this relationship very, very well. Like, it's very believable, and you get invested. There are problems that I have with this. For instance, I do feel like they do blend the CGI, the 3D and the 2D, but it doesn't blend as well. Not as well as Tarzan. I think some CG looks dated. The song, Don't Hate Me, but I feel that it's dated a bit, like it's very 2000s. But overall, this is just a fun ride, and I know that a lot of people consider this their favorite Disney film, and I can see why. Next, I watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and this, along with Tarzan, were the Renaissance films that I didn't see as a child, but I saw it now. And okay, one thing I have to say, I admire its aims for sure. When it does delve into the more mature, darker themes, with religion, sexuality, and all that stuff, I think this is, a special film, a beauty to behold. However, I do think it is a tonal mess. Like I said, when they aim for those, darker moments, this film shines. But then those moments are sandwiched in between scenes, like you have these comic relief gargoyles breaking the fourth wall, and it kind of doesn't make sense. Or you have the guards being beaten up, Looney Tunes style, very cartoonishly. And the animation is stunning, of course. This is some of the most amazing animation within the Disney Renaissance, or in Disney in general. The Hellfire sequence is, amazing. I adore it. Despite what you may not like about it, you do have to admire the fact that Disney had the guts to tackle the story and tackle the themes in it. Not my favorite, but still an enjoyable film. So now we move on to the now portion. So I'll show you what I'm currently reading, and that is The Little Snake by A.L. Kennedy. I heard that it's very reminiscent of The Little Prince. So although I didn't grow up with that story, I do enjoy it. So I'm interested in seeing how this turns out. This is basically the story about a young girl named Mary, and how she befriends this snake called Lanmo. And Lanmo, over the years, kind of just witnesses Mary growing up and living life. And I believe like a disaster strikes at the end, something sad. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. Currently reading this one. Now moving on to my TBR, so the books I plan to read. The first one is Black Sheep by Georgette Heyer. So we're following another woman who is considered on the shelf, so too old to get married, but she ends up pretty much falling in love, or falling for this sort of rogue within his family, a black sheep, if you will. And then for these two, it's for a readathon, and it's called the Ancients-a-thon, and it was started by Tori from Hufflepuff Discovery and Jennifer Brooks from the channel Jennifer Brooks. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get to my copy of The Gallic War by Julius Caesar. I picked this one up along with The Civil War. It'll be very interesting to read from Julius Caesar himself. And then this one, I think it's also a good opportunity to read this book, and that is The Quest of the Holy Grail. No author, I believe. We're following characters like Gawain, we have Lancelot, Galahad, and interesting enough, you can it can be considered like a fantasy work of fantasy fiction, but it's also considered a work of Christian mysticism, or like Christian symbolism, I've heard. So yeah, that was my then, now, later update. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. You're interested in sort of keeping up to date with what I've been doing with my reading and my film viewing. And I will see you next time. Bye!